Good morning. We're going to take transformations and go a little bit farther with them today. So we're not going to add any new transformations. Instead, I'm going to teach you how to do a mapping. And the mapping is it's a function, basically. So we're going to take a point. We're going to start with a point, and then we're going to do triangles. We'll take a point, the x and the y coordinates, so point A here, which is at -2, 3. I'm going to take those x and y coordinates, and I'm going to plug them into like a little function to do a translation or a reflection, and then I'll do something to the x and y and get a new x and y. So for instance, translation is really easy. I just want to move this to the right 4 and then down 2. So let's see. It would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then down 2, and I could find my new a doing that. But the way that I write a mapping is I take the x and the y and then I do something to them. So in this case, I want to increase the x by 4. So I would take my x, y, and the first thing I would do is I would add 4 to the x, like this. So x becomes x plus 4, and I want to decrease the y by 2, so the y I would subtract 2 because I'm going down. So this is a mapping. So I can take any point, plug it into this little function here, the x and the y, and then the output is my new point. So I'm going to do this with -2, 3 would become -2 plus 4, and then 3 minus 2. And of course, -2 plus 4 is 2, and 3 minus 2 is 1, and so that's where my a prime is. It's at 2, 1. Oops, 2, 1. There it is. So I went right 4 and down 2, and there's a prime. So mapping translation is very simple. You add if you're moving to the right, you subtract if you're moving to the left on x, add for up, subtract for down on y. Reflections across the x-axis and the y-axis are interesting. So let's take this point P here, and I want to reflect it across the x-axis. So that means I'm going to take it from being 3 units up to 3 units below, like this. So that would be P prime. Now, the new coordinates are 3, -2. Notice that when I reflected across the x-axis, the x-coordinate didn't change. It's the same because I didn't move left or right. What changed is my position relative to the x-axis. So instead of being 2 above, I went to 2 below. So that means that the x stayed the same, but the y went from +2 to -2. So we could say that when you're moving across the x-axis, the x doesn't change, but the y becomes the opposite. So we basically multiply by -1 or make it -y. And then doing the y-axis transformation, it's the same idea, except that now I'm going to go across the y-axis. So I'm going to move from 3 to the right to 3 to the left. And this would be P double prime here. And what I did there was I took my x and y. But now this is at -3, 2. So the y didn't change. When I move across the y-axis, the y doesn't change, but the x flips from positive to negative because I moved to the opposite in the left-right direction. So these are your mappings for the x and the y-axis. All right. So now let's actually do an example or two here of how this works, because I want to do two things at once. I want to translate and then reflect. So I have to come up with a mapping first. So I know that I'm going to start with any old x and y, x, y, and if I translate 2 to the right, I would add 2 to the x, and then 1 up, and so then I would add 1 to the y. But then after that, I'm supposed to reflect over the x-axis, and going back to my notes here, it says that when I reflect over the x-axis, I flip the sign of the y-coordinate. I make it negative. So that means that the x will stay x plus 2. I'm going to add 2 to the x and then nothing else. But then the y, I have to flip the sign, so I have to be really careful here by putting that y plus 1 in parentheses. I know that I'm supposed to add 1 to it, but then multiply by -1. So look here, a, I'm going to do -4 plus 2. -4 plus 2 is -2. And then I'm going to do 2 plus 1 is 3. Then I'm going to flip the sign and make it -3. So my new a is at -2, -3. A prime is here. My new b, let's see here. I'm supposed to take -3 and add 2 to it. -3 plus 2 is -1. Then I'm supposed to take 5 add 1 to it, but then also flip the sign. So 5 plus 1 is 6, so that'll become negative 6. So let's see here, negative 1, negative 6. That would be the new b, b prime. C, I have to take the negative 1, add 2 to it. That's a positive 1. Take the 3, add 1 to it, and then flip the sign. 3 plus 1 is 4, negative 4. So I go to 1, negative 4, and I find C prime. And there is my transformed triangle. And I didn't have to draw two different triangles. I was able to take this simple formula and do it. Okay, now I know that I'm running a little long here, but I'm going to do one more. We're going to reflect over the y-axis, and then we're going to translate 3 left and 2 down. So let's see here. Reflect over the y-axis means I flip the sign of the x, and then I need to take these things and go 3 to the left and 2 down. So that means I have to take that negative x here, and then subtract 3 from it, and take that y, that's a regular old y, and subtract 2 from it. So this is my mapping. Flip the sign of the x, and then subtract 3. So negative 1 becomes positive 1, and then subtract 3, that's negative 2. And then 3 minus 2 is 1. So my new x is at negative 2, 1. Negative 2, 1 here. My new y, let's see here, this 2 becomes negative 2, and then I subtract 3 from it, so that's negative 5. And then 4 minus 2 is 2. So I go to negative 5, 2. And that's my new y prime. And then finally with z, which is at 2, 0, I do 2, I flip the sign to negative 2 and subtract 3, so that's negative 5 again. And then I do 0 minus 2, which is negative 2. Negative 5, negative 2. And there's z. Okay, so look at that. I got a new triangle, and it matches this old triangle. But I used a mapping to find it. Do your best to do the 8 problems I posted, and I'll see you tomorrow.